I do have a Pro Tool system. I mainly use it for just recording, just because it's like, again, before on a slower, older computer, like having no latency monitoring and all that was sort of a thing. And now with faster computers, it's much less of an issue. But it's like, the TDM offered something more for recording at the time, and so. It was mainly just recording, and I like also a lot of the plugins and being able to process audio in it. But definitely Logic is really what I enjoy working in, and because as useful as Pro Tools is, it's like, for me at least, it's a little uninspiring, just the and it's but yeah, I mean, it's great. I like bouncing back and forth between programs. Like, I'll use Ableton Live as well. Because each different program sort of imposes a little bit different workflow. Like, they're supposed to be flexible, and they are flexible in that you can customize things. But what's nice is they usually do make you think in different ways. Especially something like Ableton Live, its layout's sort of different than anything else. So sometimes that's another way to break through a creative barrier when you're like, okay, what do I do? So let's see if this will play. I'm a little afraid. Okay, good. So this one is just where I was editing things in time. So you can hear that it's definitely it's gotten it pretty tight. And then the other thing I'll show you in here is that I have a bunch of stretched out audio sounds too. So these were done in a program called Cecilia that I'll show you. But this is how I get a lot of the granular, glitchy sounds. So this is one of those guitar parts, and this is a minute-long audio file of just basically granular synthesis with a very small, like no grains overlapping, so low grain density, and the grain size changing constantly. Yeah, Cecilia, I'll show it to you right now, actually. So I'm just going to pull this out of the way. Because Cecilia is a freeware program, and it's definitely worth exploring if you like free. And you like granular, which probably, if you make electronic music, you like, for sure. So Cecilia is based on C Sound as its, but it just provides like high-level editing, because like C Sound's pretty, or at least for someone like me, it's pretty low-level and complicated. So Cecilia provides a graphic interface to do some of the processes that you can do in there. So Cecilia, it has some different modules in it. So it has these time ones. So there's this one called Stretcher that I really like a lot. So what I can do is I can load an audio file into it. My computer's going a little slow. I think it's because there's just too much going on at once. But let's see. And well, I have Hot Pants on my desktop that like break loop. So might as well pull that in there, because otherwise I don't know how that's going to be involved in this session. And then here's where basically you can plot out the different granular parameters. So you can set an envelope for each grain. So sine wave is going to be more smooth. This bell shape has a very like sharp attack to it, which I like. I can set the number of overlaps to just 1, and then the time that it's going to render the file is a minute. And the index, what that means is that's basically like how it's going to play back through the file. Like, is it going to play back through it forward or backwards or in some random combination? So I just like to hit the randomize button. So I hit randomize, randomizes the index. Grain duration, which is basically the grain size in terms of milliseconds, I can randomize that. And then something like panning, I can randomize the panning. So, and then I'm just going to render this to disk. So I just hit play, and it renders a QuickTime, just audio file, and then let's hear what Hot Pants sounds like. It's going to be quieter, I think, than. So all kinds of like crazy grain stuff that, on its own is useless. Like this as an audio file isn't that interesting, but there might be like 2 seconds in it that are really cool. Like some little sound effect like that I want to pull out and put that into the music. So what I like to do is run everything I can through it, everything I can think of. Like I'll run all my guitars through this and comp out, maybe one measure or a quarter note that sounds great and put it back in. So it's a similar, people do similar things with Reactor or any of the kind of randomized things. And you could, if you knew specifically what you wanted to do, you could plot it out in terms of all these things over time and have it be more specific. Sometimes I want the unexpected. I just want something that's like, that I can't even think of. And so that's what I'll do. And then just for reference, let's hear what the original Hot Pants is. This is going to be much louder in volume. Yeah. Okay. Just yeah. So Cecilia is something that I've let's see what's going on here. That I use for doing that kind of stretchy stuff. Oh, I think I minimized this. Here we go. So I have that on the guitars here, and I did a couple different passes with the different guitar parts. So pretty much all the glitches that happen to the guitars that in this track are from Cecilia, and then just comped, like, because this random stuff, again, on its own isn't necessarily that useful, or isn't that musical. And to put it into a musical context, that's what the hard part is. Like it's easy to make really crazy sounding stuff, but it's hard to make it musical and fit in with other things. Yes?
Are they comped in randomly, or are they comped in the same places that, like, are they sort of synced to each other where you have the guitar part and then where the glitch would happen?
Yeah, I try to find like where, in this audio file of like all these glitches are happening, try to find the same note or the same harmonic, so that it has a, so that it sounds like the sound is being destroyed and like that it's a natural process, even though, it was a very, kind of a roundabout way of doing it, but yeah. And so let's see if there's any, oops, not the notation one. Let's, if there's any other ones in here. So, and especially I think on these harmonics, it really sounds beautiful. So there's lots of nice moments in these, and I ended up cutting out bits. Yes. What's that? Oh yeah, these together don't really work at all. So I mean, like it's gonna just sound chaos. Oh, and that's because one of them was a piano in there too. I originally I stretched out that piano part, got some nice things with it. But didn't end up using that for anything. But I might use that in a new track. So that's the other thing is when you create a whole bunch of content, even if it's random, you can end up sometimes using that stuff for future things. So let's move forward here to another session in OS 9. And this one here is where I start to put together the peak of the track. And this is before I really know the rest of the direction, but I started to come up with sort of a peak section. So here's the loops edited. And then what I started to do was cut out certain, like silence certain notes and things like that to make it all groove a little bit harder, you know what I mean? So that certain things stop, other things start, and that they don't overlap. And just I want it to be all the different musical elements to be really well integrated. So I think that doing this sort of thing where muting certain slices and only have also when music is this busy, like when there's all these like layers of busy stuff happening, in order for someone to focus on any particular aspect, like there has to be a focal point. And so by weaving the parts and having something stop and something else come in, it gives you something to focus on. Whereas like when we listen to all these parts together, just looping, it's a little bit overwhelming. But like you probably wouldn't notice these click parts if it didn't make a little pause for them that happens, that happens right there, because they would just sort of blend in with everything else and get lost in there. And so I wanted to have everything kind of come out. Okay, so we'll save. Yes. Yeah, yeah. So Effectrix, I've messed around with a little bit. And it seems like it's really cool. I haven't used that in any tracks so far. Um, but I use some of the there's like the freeware glitch ones. There's Live Cut by Smart Electronics, and there's also Super Trigger, which is by the same. It's like Bram of Smart Electronics, and you hear that on everything. I mean, the Super Trigger, like I hear it all over the place. Um, but they're a good way. It's a good starting point sometimes. Like like it's basically you want to know all the methods of doing something, and then choose whatever method works for the task that you have. So you want to know how to manually edit something and glitch it. You want to know the different randomized ways and automated plugins that will do it. Um, and then I try to make decisions based on what seems the best fit for the job. So sometimes the best result is doing something manually, and sometimes there's things that you just can't do manually. So this session was where I started to develop the peak. You'll recognize this as sort of where everything starts to build. So really, what's different in this one is that now all of a sudden there's a bass part, and I like this bass part how that turned out. Um, and so if we look at this here, let's see, it's so notice that I sort of cheated a little bit in that I use the same hits several different times. Like I've tried to get really nice sounding notes and then reuse them again. But where this all started actually was very simple. There was actually no synth part. It started as just a triangle wave. Um, and as a piece of audio. So it's this here, triangle. This is just a deep sound. Then I was using, so again, this was in OS 9. I had Pro Tools hardware, so I have all these audio suites like where I can process effects directly onto the waveform. Um, and so then what I ended up doing is for some of these notes, like this one here, it's just one bit. So it's bit crushed using lo-fi. It just comes with Pro Tools. It's one of the standard plugins and audio suites. And you can see this is just one bit, just destroyed here. And then, let's see. Oops, what did I do there? Okay. So then also what's happening here is, here's this, that one. So this wobble sound was done in the most basic way. It's just manual envelope shaping. So I have the waveform here, and then I did a fade out. You can see that this is just fade out, and I did a fade in here. And then I just copied and pasted this one exactly. That's why you see these are exact copies of each other. And then it cuts off immediately at the next note, which is a 1-bit, so the phrase is mainly constructed out of these notes here. And these last two notes are the first note, but they're just pitched differently. And you can actually hear the pitch artifacts in them if you're used to hearing a bunch of time stretching and pitch algorithms. It's that, like, I don't know, it's kind of some smearing in the spectrum that's like not quite as clear, but that's because it was that one triangle wave that I pitched around. Let's see here. Then there's this other part here that's kind of, let's see, that's, yeah. So the beginning of this, I may have taken, this looks kind of like the beginning of a kick drum. So I think I could have like it might have been layered with a kick drum piece. I'm not exactly sure how I got this attack on it because that is not just, that was not some process on the triangle wave. So I think I layered probably a kick attack with the beginning of it. But yeah, other than that, it's just basically, I mean, it's clipping. You can see it sort of turns into a square wave. And also, I used a lot of those distortion audio suites. Fortunately, it's the thing with doing things like that, like processing audio, you kind of lose track of like how you did something because there's not really a record of it. Like I don't, you process it to the audio file, and that's what happens. It's not like a live plugin that's in the session. So, but you can sort of see. I know that this one's lo-fi just because I can look at it and see that. Um, and so then there's these ones that are sort of rhythmically counterpoint that happen, and that's actually just taking the first portion of that note there, and just making a little rhythm out of that, and that sort of worked against the drums and everything else. So basically just trying to reuse the little bits that are there, and then I think the only part that's different. Okay, so the first bass part that came up with that was like a bunch of copy and paste. It was a little bit too busy. So this is the first aspect of it. And so again, you can hear those are all the same note. Like you can hear this is pitched down because it doesn't sound quite as bright as these others. But that was like way too busy, and Lawrence is like, dude, that's not gonna work. And and so yeah, so but there's some good notes in here, and that's what I try to pull out was just the little bits that work, and that's again what I'll try to reiterate about the creative process in general. It's just it's not about necessarily having brilliant ideas up front, but it's on working through the ideas and being able to make judgment calls of like, okay, this is cool and this isn't, and carving away at something until it's a little closer to something that you like, and then getting perspective on it. And I think it's the downside of that, but is that it takes a long time. Like and with Trifonic, it takes us a long time to finish music and create it. And but I think it's also when you get lost in the details, like all of this, it's easy to lose perspective. And because it is about sort of a combination of the details and all these, and the general picture, it's it had to take breaks from it and stuff. Yes. I don't know. Yeah, the questions about any recommendations about staying motivated when you're working on a piece. That's hard. I mean, I think, um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think just the desire to get something done, and also it's at some point it's a little bit of fear too. It's like, I mean, in the case with Lawrence and I, it's like I used to live in LA and I was working there, and basically, and I was working in BT studio, and it was like a pretty good job and everything, and then I left there and moved up here and was like just like, okay, I'm just gonna just work on music, like we're gonna make an album. So there's a lot of pressure in the sense that like I didn't have a job or anything, and you know, didn't and so and really motivated to get it done. So I think having pressure actually really helps, because I find that if I don't have pressure for things, it's really hard to get things done. And if there's not a deadline, it's really hard to get things done. And I'm still definitely struggle with that a lot, of like trying to get things done on when I want them to. I mean, but when there's a deadline, I have no problem. I have no problem meeting the deadline, doing a great job, and inevitably you come up with stuff that's even better than you think, because sometimes that pressure is just it forces you to just act and not overthink stuff. And as you can see here, this is a whole bunch of overthinking, and it's good. It works out in the context of integrating with a whole piece of music and having like a year to make it, but um, it's sometimes just going forth and doing something is and not and having to get it done is you come up with good things because you don't even have time to think twice about it. So I think this is the more complete peak section. And again, this is before I have the rest of the track. But I knew I was like, I was very pleased with this bit of it. I liked the whole bass part and the guitars all cut up. But that, and it's like, then the hard part was like, all right, I have a cool section, but this is not a song. This can't be extended out into a song. Like I can't just do this, for 16 more measures and and call it a song, because it's not. It's like just sort of it's like a peak. So I'll play you sort of what the final peak was before I started to rethink again. I'm like, well, what do I do from here? So with this one, I added in those Cecilia guitars, the edited parts. I'll make this bigger. Okay, so you can hear all those. So I just found little bits, and you'll notice too that I edited these even more. Like these happen on beat, for the most part. Like I tried to find prominent ones here and have them happen with everything else. Because sometimes if you have these glitchy things and they're kind of free floating, sometimes it works. Sometimes it clutters everything up. And with a track that's this busy, it was very hard not to make things cluttered. So I had to do some editing to that to make those all work. And I started to explore a different intro section. This never developed, but it's kind of funny to hear where it could have gone. I think I used those telephone sounds in something else later. It's kind of moody. I like it, but it just didn't end up working. Let's see if it goes anywhere. So trying to incorporate more of those earlier sounds I used and find a way to transition it. Some piano things that never ended up happening. Let's see. And then I think I did some kind of swell here. Or this is going to be very anticlimactic. Oh, here we go. But still, that's not a song either. Like, that's like some moody intro that goes to some peak section. So again, it's like there's all these challenges, and it's a lot of discipline to work through it. Because it wasn't that I had this whole idea figured out and was like, oh, I'm going to do this, and just sat down and did it. It was a series of just problem solving, and that's usually how I work. Because sometimes it's inspiration doesn't always fall in your lap every day. Sometimes you just have to work through stuff, and until you get inspired by the idea that you're exploring. Yes.
I was actually just curious. Each individual file that you open up is fuller and fuller and fuller, and part of that is the parts that are added. But it seems like also you're doubling, quadrupling the same part which you mentioned earlier.
Well, so part of what's happening in this session too is because this was from an OS 9 computer that was running Pro Tools. Pro Tools doesn't deal with stereo interleave files, so it splits them out into 2 mono tracks. So each of these tracks here isn't actually doubled. It just takes up like 3 and 4 is a pair, and 1 and 2 is a pair. So they're not like the same part, like copied on top of each other. Yeah, it's just left and right instead of in the sessions on like Logic 9 or like on in the other versions of Logic that weren't with the Pro Tools hardware. It's not split out like this. It's all interleaved. So I got to this point. I had a cool peak section, and then I needed to figure out the rest of the song, and that was a challenge. But so here's where I started to figure out the beginning portion, and then it was a process of once I had the beginning and I had that peak section, then it was like, okay, how am I going to get from point A to point B? But it's like the further you get into something, the easier that becomes. It starts to pull you in a direction. So the biggest hurdle is getting just any kind of interesting part that you like happening. So let's explore this section. Yes. Usually that happens later on in it. Like it's more that it's not necessarily. I think sometimes that you always have an idea of like some mood first. It's like you'll create something, and then that will remind you of something, or you'll be feeling like, or maybe it's subconsciously sort of manifests, like where, you're working on something, but usually not thinking about anything in particular. But once I'll do something, or I'll be editing something, and I'll be like, oh, that makes me think of, that sounds sort of underwater, or that reminds me of nature, or some sort of feeling or imagery. But it's usually superimposing that imagery after the fact. So I wish I could say that, it's like, oh, I wanted to depict like parks on fire, that's what I set out to do, and then I did it. But that was all after the fact. You did it first, and then I was like, oh, this kind of makes me think of all this, and these are the themes and whatever that it feels like to me. But that was, I think maybe a lot of people do that too, and they don't admit it. Like they're, it's like they like assign the meaning to something after the fact. So, so for me, it's usually that way. It's more after the fact. So here's where I started to develop the other aspects of this track. So, and even the harmony, I was still trying to figure out at this point. Wasn't finalized. I used Spectrasonic's Trilogy for the bass part. I don't have that on this computer, so it's just printed as audio. But that's, and at this point, I didn't have as much motion in it as I later put in it. These were just sort of long sustained notes. And later on, I put some more octave movement in it. Because I was thinking of like Frou Frou's Let Go and how cool that bass line is in that, and it moves. And so I wanted to do something like that because I just felt like this was sort of dragging. But then I had this wood block hit along with the string reverb, which is also sort of an important theme in the track. And that, to me, also really set the mood. Like, that's where I was like, oh, I can have this darkness in here. Then these harp bits were just programmed in it's two harp parts here. This, and it's from East West's string library. They have harp multi-samples in there, and so that's where this part, just program that. But I wanted to put sort of a triplet feeling to this, so that it's kind of like straight against triplet feeling between these two parts, because that also helps give momentum to the. And then one of the really important sounds in here too. There's a piano part. Let's see. It's more in the background, just that's doubling the melody. And this piano is actually piano. Like my brother and I, we sampled the piano. It's at our mom's house. That's like she has a grand piano or baby grand. Just have it running through some reverb, and I always use it because it's really moody and like it was not super clean recording either. So but it ends up having a lot of character. So that ends up being unique. Let's see, and then there's okay, that was just a music box. Oh, and this one's interesting. This is this pad part that's in the background. It's actually in a higher octave, I guess. Here, I'll just solo it so you can actually hear what the part is, and I'll show you what the sound is. Because I felt like this also really set the mood nice in this track. So basically, what's happening here is it's a steel drum. So like, so it's kind of embarrassing. Like, it's like carnival sound, but then it's through a Space Designer with like a really long, like you can see it's just a wet signal, 22-second. So that makes a nice pad, and then this PSP-84 is adding a little modulation to that too, and echoes to it. And I think also what works about this is, or I basically got the idea of, if any of you have seen the movie Solaris or heard Cliff Martinez's score for that, it's amazing. And I was always trying to figure out exactly what the instruments were in that. And so when I bought that CD and looked in the liner notes, it's gamelan and it's steel drum, because I could hear the gamelan, but I couldn't tell like what the other sound was. And so I was like, this was the attempt to mimic Solaris steel drum sound, and it sounds different, but I liked it. Anyway, it sort of has an interesting emotional quality to it, and not necessarily an island thing. And then the other main sound in here is this melody. This part here, which I made in Sculpture, and at the time I didn't exactly know what I was doing in Sculpture, so a little bit of luck, but I knew the type of sound I wanted. Because I had figured out and I think there's even a preset that's kind of like a marble that's rolling around, but it's not pitched at all. So that was kind of a starting place, and then I was trying to tweak it to get it. So for these different objects that are exciting the string, there's bouncing and then bound here. And then there's this automation that's happening in here of basically the amount of inner loss. And that's why when I hold down a note, the characteristic of it changes over time. So it was a combination of like luck of getting the sound, and then also just start like I knew what I wanted. Like I wanted like a marble kind of rolling sound, and then it just took a bit of tweaking to get it right. But really liked how it ended up being pretty interactive sound. Like when you hold down the note and just the way that this inner loss changes over time and how that changes the sound is really cool. So yes. Mm-mm. Yeah, that's what happens when the tension is changing on this. Like when the inner loss, when that's being like that's what's this morphing envelope or whatever you'll call this. That's automating that. That's what creates that pitch change. Is that sound? Because like some of these notes, they kind of bend a little bit, and I think also depending on the velocity too. Do all kind of weird things. Yeah. But it ended up being nice. It was really, it just a really nice melodic sound for everything. And at this point, I wasn't it wasn't in time either. I was just sort of freestyling the melody of it. So let's see. Yes. On the wood block, yeah. So it's basically just a reverb that's on it. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's happening with this. So it's two hits that are bounced together in this file. There's like that sort of orchestral hit that's basically that's just like one split second from it's like an orchestra bass drum and strings happening all at once, and then just a very long reverb on it because it's just was half a second sample and then has a reverb, and then the wood block is similar. It's just a wood block, but it's got reverb, and then the two of them ringing out on top of each other is kind of a moody combination. It definitely sets the feeling of this portion of the track. So then what I had was this section, which was very more melodic, and then I have that crazier glitched out section, and it was, just a matter of I knew that there was something good that I could tie these together, but I wasn't exactly sure how to do it. And actually with this series of sessions to get to this point, I kind of had to take a step back. Like I knew I couldn't keep going in the glitchy direction. I went back to an earlier session, started messing with those original sounds again more and adding new things to see. And when I came up with this, I realized that I could probably tie the two together, although I wasn't totally sure whether that was going to be possible or not. So let's see. Pretty much. I can look in this one. I think I also have this patch in here. I think velocity may have been affecting some things. Um, you can. I think what I started with was the preset that starts as kind of a marble that has that sort of automation, and I may have expanded that a little bit. I don't remember fully of what happened with that, but let's take a look and see if there's other stuff happening with. Let's see. Do I have that in this session? I may have already bounced it by this one, but oh, here it is. Okay. So down at the bottom here, it's kind of hard for me to read that. So the vibrato is controlled by the touch there, so after touch, I guess, and some some stuff controlled by the mod wheel, but I wasn't really using that. I think probably on the controller I had aftertouch, and that is what I imagine helps with some of the pitch bending. But even just this here is like not doing really anything with this morphing pattern here works pretty well. And if I change the depth of it too, it also really changes the sound. It's more of like a flute kind of sound that I can turn into like a bouncy ball marble. So it ends up being very versatile, and I like usually when I'm creating sounds, like a couple things that happen. So sometimes I totally know what I'm doing, and in more recent times, like I have a much greater depth of understanding for a lot of synthesis. Although sculpture is still something that's a little bit mysterious to me, but and so sometimes I'll set out and I know what I have in mind and just go forward and do it. And I save lots of iterations of presets because every time you touch something, sometimes you can go in a different direction. So just, like for example, this one's called Melodic Marbles 3. I don't know if I have in my patch list here all of them. So yeah, I don't have anything on this computer, but on my other computer, I've got like Melodic Marbles 10, and just like saved every iteration as soon as I touched anything because it just sounds so different. And if I change the material that this, that this is made out of, it changes the characteristic of it a lot. Like, it's made out of glass or wood. So I mean, just every little touch makes a big difference. So let's see. In this session here, I think is where I started to tie things together. That sound may not play back properly anymore, but that's okay. So I think I started to figure out the intro here a little bit. So again, here's those clicky sounds from the very first sessions integrated into the rest of this with the wood block. And so started to get this going, bringing in those bass elements from the peak section and adding a couple other ones in there too. So one of them that you're hearing in there, I really like, and I do have it as an instrument here. This, oh yeah, this sounds like Little John or something right now when I played it up that high. So this is basically, the idea is based on the sort of the drum and bass, the restyle sound. So if I turn off the filter for a second, you can just hear it's saw waves. Detuning saws, and then the filter, and with the envelope and LFO combined, get that sort of sound happening. So basically what we have is this envelope 1 here is modulating the filter cutoff. So it's a low pass filter that's happening here. And so that's opening up basically over time. You can see this envelope shape. And then there's also LFO2 here, which is generating this ramp down 8th notes, is also modulating the filter cutoff. So the combination of the two, you get that sort of thing. Whereas if I get rid of that, just the filter opening, that's just the envelope alone. And then with the LFO in there, it's. So I really liked that sound, or the idea of it, even though that itself wasn't quite right. So I yeah, so the LFO is also modulating filter cutoff. It's just the wave shape of the LFO is like was a downward ramp. So it's like a sawtooth, but it's like just half a sawtooth ramping down. So let's see. And then I printed that all to audio. Uh-oh. Let's see. Is this going to freak out again? I've been having some troubles, like just literally as of yesterday, sometimes of clicking on things and opening the sample editor of it, not liking that. But anyway, what I was going to show is that sound that I was just showing on EXS24 there. To make that as a transitional effect in the track, I just reversed it so that it's doing that same wow 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 wow, except it's backwards. It has this suction to it that was really nice, and so I use that to lead into things. So okay, I'm gonna do a force quit on this.